Okay, hello everyone. Can everyone hear me? Please let me know if you have any problems. My name's Kate and I'm your moderator for today's session. I'm going to run through a few slides before I hand over to Gill Budgell, who is presenting the webinar. Okay, right, so the first slide. For those of you who are new to Illuminate, this is the participant interface. And I'm just going to use the pointer here to show you a few things. At the top left, oh, is that right? Here, yeah. You can see the participant window, and this shows who's joining us and who's leaving us and so on. And below that, just here, is the chat window where you can chat to us and you can chat to each other and ask us questions and so on. You can either address the whole room or address the moderators directly with a question. And to the right of the participant interface you can see the whiteboard, and this is where we're going to be showing the presentation. So the next slide. If at any point during the session you have problems with audio, go to the Tools menu, select Audio, and then run Audio Setup Wizard and follow the instructions there. If you're still having problems, try clicking on the green striped wavy line at the very bottom on the left-hand side. We're not sure what it does exactly, but sometimes it makes a difference. When I hand over to Gill, you'll be able to see the video feed in a window as shown here. To move the video, grab the bar and move it into position. You can resize the box using the enlarge and reduce buttons, and if your video feed looks coarse or grey, you can change this by selecting Fine Colour in the Maximum Quality option menu. There is a chat window, as I mentioned before, in which you can choose to address the moderator or the whole room. If you have any questions, type them into the chat box and I'll note them for the question and answers section at the end of the session. We are recording the session, so it's worth remembering that whatever you write will be recorded. We will make the recording available alongside the PowerPoint slides in about a week. And finally, oh, we've moved on a bit too quickly. There will be you'll be able to request a certificate of attendance for the webinar, and details will follow at the end of the session. So now I'm going to hand over to Gill and she'll take over the presentation.
Welcome everybody. I hope you can see me. Hello, Gill Budgell here. Can you just indicate if you can hear me, see me? Lovely, thank you very much. A big welcome to you all. I'm delighted so many of you have been able to join me today. It's a very, very sunny day here in the UK. I'm not quite sure where you're all from, but I look forward to chatting to you along the way. Can you all see me too? I hope you can. I'm sat here in my office. Okay, well let's make a start today. I'm wanting to talk to you about phonics and the practicality of using phonics in the classroom with young EFL learners. My own background is as a primary school teacher. I did some EFL training in my early years, and I've worked with English as a second language and English as an additional language children, mainly in mainstream classrooms. And what I really want to explore is the idea of just how useful the idea of phonics is for those young learners learning English as a second language. So I've started off with a light-hearted slide saying who would love phonics, because actually it's rather a strange thing to love, but I actually do. I've worked for many, many years with language literacy, development, and I actually find it endlessly fascinating, and I hope you will too. I should start with a word of warning. I tried to find some research evidence to support the idea that starting with phonics with EFL young learners is a fantastic idea and highly effective. And I have to say to you, I actually couldn't find any convincing evidence. I think the jury is still out and we need further evidence. to help us understand whether in fact this is a sensible strategy. There are lots of other reasons to do phonics with young children, but whether it really helps with their language acquisition I think is still unknown. I found that someone called Purewal, P-U-R-E-W-A-L, in 2008 did a study of synthetic phonics and literacy development with second language learners, and despite all his efforts, he found nothing convincing either way. He couldn't prove it did or it didn't help. So I suppose with that backdrop, I would say to you, let's just explore it anyway. I believe it helps. It helps in lots of different ways. And perhaps it will inspire one of us to go away and do some further research. So let's move on without further ado. So this is my outline for today. We've had a little intro about my experience and why I want to talk to you about phonics today. I want to look a little bit about what we mean by phonics, because I think it's one of those terms we use quite loosely, and so I thought it would be useful to touch base on what we mean by it. And then, because we're trying to look at practical ways that we might use phonics in the classroom, I thought I'd categorise it. So I'm going to look with you at some speaking and listening ideas, some reading, some writing, and then a sort of resource roundup and a summary of what we've discovered. And I look forward to seeing your questions as we go along, which I think we're going to record there in the chat box. Just do a final check, everyone can hear me okay. You've all gone very quiet, so I hope you can. Okay, so what do we mean by phonics? Well, I thought this was quite a fun slide, and when I do this with a workshop, in a workshop format, I get people to try to spell phonics in as many different ways as possible. And this is a Wordle, which some of you may be familiar with, which outlines some of the possible phonics, spellings of phonics. And as you can see, all of these do follow a rule. And if a child, or if we, decided we were going to spell the word in this way, it would actually, each one of them would technically be correct. There is obviously only, in fact, I haven't put the correct spelling on, strangely enough. I've only done different variations. But you can see the complication we've got here. We do have, as I will keep repeating, 26 letters in the English alphabet system. And as you know, we have 44 sounds. And as represented here, we actually have about 120 spelling pattern options to choose from. So in terms of young learners, it's really very challenging to know which ones might be the correct ones. I put this in as an extra bit of fun as well, because I looked back in time, and I don't know if I hold this up to my web. Yeah, here we go. It's a little chapbook, little chapter book. Very, very old, from about the 18th century. Obviously, this is not the original. And I was quite interested to see how the alphabet used to be taught. And you can see here from these little pictures that, in fact, it was just the alphabet that was taught. And sometimes that's still what people think phonics is about. And I want to show you clearly that it's about so much more than that. But you can see here that there's a capital letter I and a lower K. That's good. It's also exploring the idea of font. So it's quite interesting for children to see that actually the letters don't always look the same. There's also a little bit of a picture underneath. And that's very useful for children to have something, a visual clue to remind them. And in fact, as inappropriate as this is now, in those days, I in this alphabet stands for an in, where people get tipsy with brandy and gin. Clearly not something we would want to use with young children these days. But at least it's I or I for in, not I or I for ice cream. Often you find that in an alphabet. They choose to take the long vowel phoneme as opposed to the short. So actually, to all intents and purposes, this is quite a useful little page. And it says at the bottom, "But mind, little folks, the drunkard can never inherit the life that endures forever." So here we get a little moral tale as well, quite a nice little lesson that we can teach the children. So I thought that was just a bit of fun. Can't remember if I put another one in. Oh, I did. I found this one as well. And again, historically, it's quite interesting to see that here's the idea of teaching the consonants and then seeing how each consonant sounds with the vowel added. So that was quite an interesting way to tackle phonics. And then on the right, we've got a different picture that just made me laugh. R was a robber and hung as you see, a lot that I hope will ne'er before me, and R ran for it, or as we would say now. Anyway, that was just a little historical guideline, but it's interesting to see how, in fact, it's not all quite so bad as you might have thought. Well, moving on, what is a phoneme? Phoneme comes from the Greek, which I'm not going to pronounce because my Greek phonics phonetics isn't very strong, but it's about the smallest uttered sound. And as I've said, we have 44 of these. Now, typically as trainers, we might become aware of those sounds through the phonetic alphabet. And I've popped this slide in to show you that actually Macmillan have just produced this as an app, and it is a free app. So if you want to find this afterwards, you can Google Macmillan Sounds, and this will come up as an interactive app. It's not going to be free in the end. I think you've got to pay for it when it has more functionality. But at the moment, as a teacher trainer, it's a really useful tool. You can go on, if you understand the phonetic alphabet, and you can click once to hear the sound, and if you hold down on the chart, it will bring up a word representing that sound. And so I think for us as teachers, that's actually quite a useful tool. But clearly, we don't want to be sharing this type of phonetics with the children. It's going to put them off. It's not going to mean anything. And so we want something that's much more user-friendly. So moving on, I put this screen in because I wanted to explain to you that here in the UK, we are obsessed with phonics. So it's not just me, we are obsessed with phonics. And these people are various important government people here in the UK who are now insisting that worldwide evidence is suggesting that all children aged 5 to 7 need to learn languages through phonetics. The top person there here is Michael Gove, and he is our Secretary of State for Education. The person at the bottom is Nick Dibb, who is our Schools Minister. And the person in the middle, the lady working with the child, is Ruth Miskin, who is a head teacher, researcher, and writer, author of Oxford University Press's Read Write Inc. programme. And together they're working to ensure that the very best phonic practice is happening in mainstream schools with L1 learners. Thank goodness you'll see from, can't quite see that at the moment with my video anyway, but they're saying there is more to reading on phonics, of which we must remember this is only one very small part of what we want children to do. But high quality academic evidence from across the world, from Scotland and Australia to the National Reading Panel in the United States, shows that the systematic teaching of synthetic phonics, I'll come back to that term synthetic phonics in a moment, is the best way to teach literacy to all children, and especially those aged 5 to 7. So teachers here not getting very much choice, they need to do it because it's not compulsory, but it's very much encouraged to be taught that way. They're even going to introduce a test for our 6-year-olds to see if by 6 they understand how to decode, how to use their phonics. So I thought it might be useful to show a little bit of what our teachers in mainstream are using. I was presenting last week at the Brighton ITESL, and I used this chart then to introduce this notion, and many teachers were very interested. I've got the document here, the Letters and Sounds document, which I think you'll be able to see. And again, if you Google the Department for Education, Letters and Sounds, you can download the whole of this document. You can see it's quite a heavy booklet, but you can download it phase by phase. This is what teachers are using, and I think there are quite a few useful ideas and tips in here. So do take a look at it. This chart summarizes what phases 2 to 6 contain. I'm going to come back when I'm talking about some practical ideas for listening and speaking to show you phase 1. But this chart just starts with phase 2. And you can see that in the very beginning here, I don't know if you can see this if I do this with my mouse. Phase 2 begins with introducing the single consonant sound and the short vowel sounds. So for example, we might learn a, and as soon as we know those letters, we then start putting them together to read and spell words. So if we know a, we can blend to make sat. If we know pa, we can blend to make pat. So the idea with letters and sounds is that you learn some initial sounds and then you quickly use them to both read and spell. That's phase 2. Phase 3, I'll go through these fairly quickly because it's a little bit dull, this chart, and we want to get onto the fun ideas. But phase 3 continues with that. It introduces some of the more difficult consonants and the more complicated vowel digraphs. We introduce the idea of 2 letters, 1 sound. So we say C and H make ch, 2 letters, 1 sound. S and H make sh, 2 letters, 1 sound. And again, we start to play with those letters, putting them together with vowels, so that we can read, so that we can decode, and so that we can have fun. It's not all deadly boring. Phase 4, we start to learn how to put the consonants together, so that we can, you can see there, I've put C, D, C, C, that we look at how we can blend consonants at the end of a word, so that we might get a word like bend, b, e, n, d. And we show the children how we can put those together to read the word bend. Or indeed how we can put consonants together at the beginning of a word, so that we can read something like snap, snap. And then we start also having some fun with words like windmill, so that we can say here's wind, what, it, d. Windmill. So we can start playing with the syllabification of words, and all of this is beginning to get the children right through to understanding our phonic system. Phase 5 looks at new graphemes for reading, alternative pronunciation, so we're getting more sophisticated. I'll give you some examples in a moment. And we start putting these into sentences, so we're not just reading isolated words, we're beginning to use them in a context. And phase 6 really begins to push forward into spelling, so it starts to look at adding ed to make the past tense, or adding ing, for example. And you'll probably be a little bit shocked when I say all of this really happens by the time children are 6 or 7. These are our primary years. So phase 1, which I'm going to show you later, is really for 3 and 4-year-olds. And then phase 2, 3 and 4 are really for our 4 and 5-year-olds. Phase 5 for our 5 to 6-year-olds, and phase 6 for our 6 to 7-year-olds. I hope you're still all with me. Oh, went on too quickly. Okay, this slide is just giving you some of the examples that I just sounded out for you. You'll have noticed that I didn't at any point, for example, on the 3rd line, I didn't say l, a, mp. I didn't put the mp together. In synthetic phonics, which I'm going to come on to explain in a moment, it's very important that we teach the children to sound out each individual sound. Except, of course, when we taught them, as in chimp, we don't want them saying because we've taught them that a C and an H together are the 2 letters, 1 sound. So it's ch, I, m, p. This represents stage 2 in green, stage 3 in blue, stage 4 in red, and so on, through to stage 6. Okay, so let's have a little bit of a think about speaking and listening. I said I'd come back to that. I put some fun pictures in here of some children using phonics, and at the bottom one, of course, the little lad dressed up as a pirate reminds us that, of course, all of this has to be in the context of a rich and broad language curriculum. We're not saying we want children to sit down and doggedly drag through phonic lessons. It's got to be fun, and it needs to be fun. So let's have a look what phase 1 of letters and sounds. This is phase 1 of this document which I referred to, which remember you can download even phase by phase. It's not a teaching program. I shouldn't say it's something you can download and then find lesson plans, but it does have the progression and the structure, and it does give you some odd game ideas. So phase 1 is all about being able to hear and identify different sounds. So you can see here, I've got a picture of a bird. Children need to be able to hear sounds in the environment and be able to identify, oh yes, that's, if you're playing Sound Lottery, that's a bird as opposed to a motorbike. They need to be able to hear musical sounds. So when you get the box of instruments out, you can play the tambourine and have some fun, and you can sing. You need to be able to use body sounds, so perhaps a clapping, or a slapping or a tapping. These are all really interesting words for children to explore and get their ears ready for listening to the all-important letters and sounds that we need them to tap into for reading. I've put some musical notes there because music and singing and rhythm and rhyme are all very lovely early years activities that of course we want to encourage. I've put silly soup because alliteration is another very fun thing for us to do. How many words can we string together? Can we sing rhymes like Betty Botter bought some butter and Peter Pepper pot? And children just love making up silly rhymes in their own, in L1 and in L2. It's good early years practice. I put the little chap on the zip wire here because another fun thing to do is to say to the children in a physical PE lesson, how might your voice sound if you were going down the zip wire and back up the other side? We want to encourage them to say, woo, so that they're beginning to experiment with pitch and tone and pace. And these are all very important precursors to learning phonics. And the last one is an I, to remind us that, of course, even the old-fashioned games like I Spy with my little eye, something beginning with if, get the children to listen. Can they hear what if would make? Encourage them to orally blend and segment. And of course the word is zip, and they can shout it out, and then they can have a turn. And this is a really important, oral blending and segmenting of words is a very important precursor to the more formal work that we want to introduce the children to. Okay, this is a fun free website that I've come across, but I thought if you don't know it, I don't know if any of you do, you might be interested to have a look. Children find it great fun. Mr. Thorne is a real person. He looks a bit scary in those sunglasses, but he's a real Year 1 class teacher, and he works in central London with lots of children who are bilingual. And he decided he couldn't quite find the sorts of lively online videos that he wanted to use with his children, and so he's created his own, and they're all available free. The website's at the bottom there. Do take a look. They do follow the progression of letters and sounds, but you could dip into them and use them in any way you want to. You could even use them as inspiration to make your own, which is lovely, or get the children to make their own if they're very proficient with technology. He wears funny glasses, he puts on funny hats so the children think it's great fun, and he's got a hand puppet he uses called Geraldine the giraffe. And Geraldine is sometimes quite naughty and sometimes helps him to find things that are going to begin with the letter B, or things in the house that begin with Ch. So it's really a very nice website for you to explore. I thought I had another one, but I don't. Okay, so those were just a few ideas for speaking and listening. I should have said, sorry, I'll just go back slightly. I should have said, on that screen where I was talking about letters and sounds and using your voice and tuning in with your ears, here, this is quite a controversial idea in terms of phonics teaching. Whilst those things are undoubtedly lovely early years things to do, and we want to be doing them to encourage children to enjoy language, again, there isn't very much research evidence to show that that actually helps children with their reading and their writing. So whilst we encourage those things, phase 1 is the most controversial of those phases. I should have said that. Okay, so let's move on to look at reading. Lots of lovely things here to do with reading. I've put on here some pictures of children reading both print book and on screen. Again, really important. I actually don't mind where children are reading as long as they're loving it and they're reading. And of course, with World of White interactive whiteboards, we're really happy to encourage any reading at all. The pages here that I've put up are actually from the Explorers, the Young Explorers books that I've been working on with Macmillan. I'm going to talk about some of the little phonic books in a little bit more detail in a moment. But you can see absolutely charming. Sorry, I want to move back again. Absolutely charming little illustrations about a little teddy bear family. Teddy in bed, he's got a sore leg, Teddy was sad. So very simple text. And then at the end of all the Macmillan Explorer books, you always find this little practice and learn. So you read the story, you enjoy it, you enjoy the language, but it is written in a way that will encourage you to read independently, because there's nothing quite like being able to read a book on your own. And then there's a little practice and learn at the end where you're encouraged to say the sounds, farm, make the words and talk about the words. So it's all about completing the circle in terms of blend, segment, read, discuss, build your vocabulary. Oh, back to a little bit of pedagogy here. One of the things I haven't mentioned is, I think that I did mention the word synthetic. There are two main types of pedagogy for teaching phonics. One is analytic phonics and one is synthetic phonics. And a lot of ESL materials rely very heavily on analytic phonics. Now this is, I'm sure some of you already know this, so I'll go fairly quickly. But if you're looking at the word dog and you can say d, o, g, you know the d-ness of the letter or the grapheme d. And so if you know that, you can probably then think of other words that begin with d. So you can read dig, dip, stop, dug. You might even be able to recognize the d at the beginning of dinosaur. Similarly, if you can read the word dog, you know something about the O and the G making the og sound. So you could read dog, change the initial consonant to make fog, cog, frog. Clearly this is a lovely rhyme activity. We do this all the time. We even have 2-year-olds who can jump around the garden singing dog, fog, cog, frog. It's a fun thing to do. Children love rhythm, love rhyme. But it isn't thought to be the best way to teach phonics, because it's not encouraging children to hear the individual sounds. We want them to be able to say d, o, g. Or in this example that I'm putting up, a synthetic phonics, and that's what lies behind the letters and sounds research, which is thought to be the best way to teach phonics. If we're reading cat, we want 3 sounds. We want k, a, t. We want the children to be able to hear those 3 sounds and then blend them. Say them faster. Cat. And then we cheer because we've all read the word cat. If we want children to write the word dog, writing is the inverse of reading. So we blend to read and we segment to spell. So we say the word dog and we segment it. We think in our head, I can hear dog, d, o, g. I know what to write for d, I know what to write for o, and I know what to write for g. I say each sound and I write each sound, and hey, I can write the word dog. Very simplistically, that's the principle. And I hope some of you already know, I'm sorry if some of you already know that, but I thought it was worth running through, because most of what we're saying here is based on this principle of synthetic phonics. But oh, you're probably saying, what about all those tricky words that actually don't follow phonics, that break the rules? English is full of words that just don't seem to fit with what we know about phonics. Because remember, we've got those 26 letters, 44 sounds, and about 120 patterns to choose from. Well, I know, phonics isn't the holy grail. Words like the aren't going to follow a pattern. We just have to learn them. Sometimes I put a picture there, you see, of a child covering his eyes. Sometimes we have to close our eyes and imagine them in our head. Some children are very good at visual learners. Sometimes, as with the word when, I've drawn lines around it. Sometimes children find it very helpful, if we're working in this multisensory way, to put a shape around the letter, and they can visualize the shape of the word. But sometimes we think of the mnemonic. We might think, okay, people, we'll put a little picture there so that we can remember when we're struggling with that word, we remember the picture. And of course, many published resources, some of you perhaps will be familiar with things like Jolly Phonics or Letterland, they utilize the idea of mnemonics. So when you're learning, they actually do it at letter level. So if you're learning the letter A, I don't know if you can see my arm here, but you'd say ah, 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 so that you'd have little ants running up and down your arm, and that would help you to remember the letter and the sound A. But undoubtedly, I admit there are these words which we're going to struggle with sometimes, and we have to work in a multisensory way to help children to remember these words. And many of them, it's worth saying, are only tricky until we know the rules. So when, W-H-E-N, is actually phonically decodable once we understand that W-H is the two-letter one-sound rule, and that it says W, F, U. So actually, once we know the rules, it's not tricky at all. Okay, so let's move on to some practical ideas. These were some ideas that I thought would be quite fun to share with you. Various ideas about making the learning even more multisensory. Getting the children up and moving is always a really good way to get them engaged. And dressing them up so that they can actually be phonemes themselves works pretty well. So when you're introducing a new grapheme, a new letter shape for a new phoneme, that's quite a tricky thing. So we perhaps have already learned something like double E for the long vowel phoneme E. It's always good to prepare a bank of words in advance so that we've got quite a few ready to share with the children. And perhaps make some flashcards, which I know you'll all be using extensively with children. And it's always useful to have some perhaps with some pictures on as well. Choose words that the children already understand. If they already know see as in looking, then introduce the notion of the EA grapheme for the same phoneme by using the other word see. And choose words that you can mime or illustrate so that the children can jump up and enjoy acting them out. Similarly, if we're introducing a new grapheme for a known phoneme, I'm sure you do this anyway, many of you, use the children's names or use familiar words. Or, as in, I mentioned with Mr. Thorne does Phonics, use a toy or a puppet, because the toy and the puppet can be naughty, the toy or the puppet can make mistakes so the children can laugh and correct. And I think all of that makes it much more fun for them. Teaching the split digraph or the magic E, however you want to describe it, again, it's quite a difficult concept and it's quite difficult for us to show. So giving children opportunities to physically split up by giving them a flashcard which they stand with and then making them pushing one of the letters in between so that the children can see how in the word same you have to for the long vowel phoneme A, you have to literally push the M between the A and the E. It's quite an effective way to act this out. And ask two children to hold hands to represent the grapheme and get a third children to push between them so that they get the idea that this is what we're doing with our letters. I'm not sure if that's a familiar idea to any of you, but certainly physicality is crucial with early years learning. When we're using investigations and word sorts, when we're teaching a particular phoneme or a group of letters, it's quite fun to try and make up your own stories or tongue twisters with the children. And there are books available now where you could read a little story. In fact, you could even do this with the Macmillan Explorer books. You could take a story and get the children to highlight the words that are the focus of the lesson. So we call that phoneme spotting. And they quite like to see who can find the most words with long vowel phoneme E in or whatever. Makes it a bit of a game. You could even set the timer. They like working against the time. And I think this is the final one of this. Use the classroom environment for pupils to practice and apply their phonics skills. And again, I'm sure you all do this. Collect new words or make class displays on working walls so the children can come in from home with new words, use post-it notes to put them up. Or if you're working interactively, use a program a little bit like Walrusher where you can clip up new ideas interactively quite quickly. Label parts of the school building or the playground. I know it's quite difficult because I realise that some of you won't have as much time as L1 teachers here in the UK, but it's quite fun, I think, again, to label vocabulary around the classroom, make it real, and then perhaps have to run to the chair, run to the blackboard. It depends how many children you've got in the classroom, clearly. Also, you can make a phonics tree to display and consolidate new learning, and children quite like that as well because as they discover new words that fit the patterns, they can add to the tree. They can make leaves, make different coloured leaves to add to the tree. Most importantly, we need to make sure that we're providing opportunities for pupils to practice and apply their phonics skills. There's no point just teaching the letters. We're only learning the letters and the letter sounds so that we can read, speak and read and write, actually all three critically important. But as soon as the children are old enough, bearing in mind, of course, they're still in the fairly early stages of learning how to read in their own language, so I realise that this is a slightly different take on reading. I wanted to start with this, which is a slightly and a little bit of a criticism. Pearson have come out with a big new reading programme for L1 students here in the UK, and normally there's some superb material, but actually it's a little bit disappointing, this particular example, and it may be that I just picked on a poor example, but I don't really want to be putting this type of material in front of the children. Kit, not in Dan's cot. A cat, I can barely read it myself, a cat got to Kit. I don't think, even though I've got the option at the bottom here to have this read to me, because this is an interactive resource or a printed resource, I don't think those are particularly good models for our children. And I think one of the things we want to be doing is definitely offering them good models. Kit Naps isn't really helping me terribly much to tune into English. Pad got man. Well, okay, they are CBC, they are accessible, but are they really meaningful? I think the great skill, which I do believe we've achieved in Explorers, is that we're producing good stories with fun elements that may have some meaning, but actually still allow the children to read. So here we are. Here's a couple of the stories from Macmillan Explorers. We've got In Daisy's Box, Tom's Haircut, and The Muddy Sheep. I think you probably already know that Explorers has about 8 levels for children aged 4 to 12, and the new Explorer Phonics will only provide materials for 4 to 8-year-olds. And that's right, Phonics has its place at the very beginning. Little Explorers A, Little Explorers B, and Young Explorers 1 and 2. There's going to be just 12 books. So let's have a look at what they might have inside them. So I hope this is a better example of the sort of language that we want to be offering these young children. Gosh, I'm looking at the time and thinking I must stop fairly soon. Okay, so this is a story called Pin It On. And it's a game about, we usually play the game of pin the tail on the donkey. I don't know if that's a game that you're familiar with. You blindfold the child and they have to try and see if they can get the tail on the donkey. And in this case, we're doing it with a fox because we want the children to be able to read the word fox. So it's come and play, Daisy, get a pin. And Daisy's coming through the door holding a box. I can stand on this box. Because obviously she couldn't reach if she doesn't. And the story goes on. And of course the joke is she ends up pinning the tail to the fox's ear. So you can see that in this sense we are offering proper sentences. We are offering a proper story that's rich enough to allow some discussion. The second page on the right-hand side is a second story where Daisy keeps holding back pieces of the jigsaw and the family are getting very annoyed because they want to find the correct part. So Danny is looking for this bit. It's got a fox on it. Can you see the fox? Oh yes, I can see it. But of course Daisy's hiding it all the time. So you get the idea that this is a much richer opportunity to teach phonics and apply phonics. And at the end you can see I've just overlaid there a checkup. So that As well as that practice and learn, which I showed earlier on, you get a little checkup at the end, and children love to then go back and see, can I read these words? So do take a look at them. Oh, bye-bye, Roman. Thanks very much for coming. I see someone's leaving at this point. Okay, this is a quick summary to show that these phonic explorers show a clear phonic focus. So when you attempt to read a book, you know exactly what the focus of the book is. You don't have to focus on that if you don't want to, because it's still a story. But if you want to, you know exactly why you're using it. I think that's very important. Parents like that too. Okay, writing. I'm going to have to go quite quickly, because I do want to leave some time for some questions. Writing is obviously critically important too. And this is a new app that I came across recently that I thought was worth sharing with you. It's called Hairy Letters. It's not the best name. It's by a company called Nessie.com. I put the link at the end there. I think it's something like £1.79. Again, it introduces the letters and the sounds in the sequence of letters and sounds for documents. It enables you to, it animates the letters. It helps children to form the letters correctly. Letter formation is obviously a very important part of phonics. And it also helps it helps you to play little games so that you can practice your blending and your segmenting. It also introduces the lowercase and uppercase letters. So definitely worth checking out that little app, but it's not free. And this was another app for an English phonics test, which I don't know about that, but it's quite an interesting thing to have a look at. And this is the Thras website. The Thras materials are a very comprehensive set of materials for teaching phonics too. And this is a little test app that's been developed, and you can actually download, I think, a sample of this for free. So it's, again, perhaps worth having a look to see whether you think that's something that's useful for your students. Or in fact for you, you might find that very useful. Okay, so in terms of a range of resources, what I've really tried to show is that phonics is good for speaking and listening, reading and writing. It's really all about those things. It's not just about pronunciation, which I think we often think in terms of EFL. I want to show that materials providing a range of resources is important. So here we've got a child at an interactive whiteboard. We want to use discs. We want to use handheld learning. We want to use puppets. We want to use chalk. We want to use books. And I think the richer we can make the range of resources that we have access to, the better. It makes it fun for us as teachers, and it makes it fun for the learners too. So just to finish with, these are some principles of effective phonics programs. And again, this is with L1 in mind, but I'm really interested to open the debate to find out how much of this you think is applicable to L2 learners. Clearly, any phonics program needs to be set within a broad and balanced curriculum, both for your first language teaching as well as for your second language teaching. I think it needs to be systematic, clearly defined, with a structured progression, and that's what I've tried to show through using letters and sounds as my example. Dotting around here, there and everywhere with sporadic, opportunistic moments to teach phonics, I would argue is probably very ineffective. So I think it's probably worth looking for something that's systematic. Discrete daily sessions delivered at pace. Well, I realise that many of you won't have the time to be able to do a daily phonics session in English. In fact, many of you, I suspect, will only have a weekly lesson. But maybe part of that weekly lesson, even if it's just the first part of that lesson, 5 minutes of that lesson, working through something that's really quite systematic, may get you further forward than just, again, leaving it to when a particular course book thinks that there's an opportunity to look at CBC. And effectively, you're not ever moving much beyond the initial sounds in CBC work. And as I hope I've shown, there's huge potential for moving on massively, still using a phonic approach. I've tried to argue also that the synthetic approach seems to be the one that is worth examining more closely. So yes, do analytics using analogy for rhythm and rhyme for fun. But actually, in terms of teaching phonics, synthetic approach would seem to be the better one. understand that blending and segmenting are reversible processes. Remember I talked about blending for reading and segmenting for spelling. And these are two parts of the same coin, and very important to show the children how they work either way. Multisensory, well, as early years practitioners, of course we want our teaching and learning to be multisensory. We want to look at the children's strengths and play to those, so that's very important. And finally, speaking and listening is the foundation for embarking on phonics. So that's phase one that I talked about, where I said it was controversial. Actually, I just think children will respond very well to those things. And in terms of second language learning, I think it's critical that we have fun and get children tuned in to listening. We want clear guidance on how to assess children's progress so that we know where to go next. Assessment in phonics is a big issue here for L1 learners. Again, most programs that you would select should help you with how to do that effectively, as well as, of course, that app that I showed you. You know, increasingly we've got tools like that that enable us to work more independently. And finally, we need to be thinking about how we can adapt programs for special needs. And I'm seeing here special needs as the special needs that, or challenges that the children bring with their own language. I think as publishers, we need to be thinking more about how we can help teachers adapt materials depending on the children's first language. You know, teaching phonics for Spanish speakers has its different challenges to speaking to those who would come with Polish or Russian. And I think as publishers we need to help you as practitioners to make better use of that knowledge, because each one brings skills and challenges that I think play out in the phonics quite differently. So I'm going to stop there because I'm conscious that there might be some questions. I don't think questions have been coming up in the chat box, but if people would like to put any questions now, I think that's the way the webinar works. If you'd like, you'll see that if you'd like a certificate for attending this webinar, there's an address there that you can write to. And I'd like to thank you very much for joining me. I hope you found it useful, and I'm very happy. I've put my email address on my Twitter account at the end, and if you want to follow up on anything that I've raised, I'd be delighted to talk it through with you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Do ask if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer. You're welcome. Okay, well it seems we have no questions, so I'll end the presentation now, and thank you once again for joining me. Bye-bye.